Hello there, fellow cultists. This is DM Nell, and I am back with another Sotdl talk. And today we are talking about something I've been wanting to talk about for a while, and it is one of a series of supplements. And I don't really know how to describe these other than them being a combination of setting and rules. And I'm counting 5 in the series, starting with Tombs of the Desolation. Actually, I don't know what it started with, but Tombs of Desolation is one of them. Terrible Beauty, which is the one we'll be covering today, is another one. I'm not even showing these. Okay, Tombs. Here we go. Here we go. Camera. Tombs of the Desolation. Exquisite Agony. Terrible Beauty. Glorious Death, A Glorious Death, and then Hunger in the Void. So these are all, book-size supplements, and they're all excellent. I love it. I love all of them. I've been actually wanting to do videos on each of these, but I've been kind of waiting until I do more of a deep dive into them, and I do a deep dive generally when I get ready to use them in a game, but I haven't really been focusing on any one of these topics in my game, so I haven't had a need to do a deep dive. So rather than delay any further, I decided to just pick one, and for today's I picked Terrible Beauty. And I wanted to just kind of go through this book. This isn't a review. You may decide whether to buy it or not if you like what you hear, but I'm not here to review this book and say whether it sucks or whether it's great. I think it's great. I think all these books are great. They all have information that will supplement your game and your campaign. So, and they are most definitely worth the money that you would pay for them. Whether on DriveThruRPG as a PDF or if you do a print on demand and have an actual softcover book like I did delivered to me or to you. So the books are excellent, and I recommend every single one of them. But this one in particular has to be the one that I've read the least, which is why I picked it first. Because I wanted to give myself an excuse to actually read it from front to cover. Front to cover? Yeah, really, from front to cover. From cover to cover. And basically immerse myself in it. And I'm glad I did, because there's a hell of a lot more in here than I even realized. And I've had this book for about 3 or 4 years now. I don't even know when it came out. I think it came out in 2016. So I've had this book for 5 years. And this is the first time I've actually sat down and read through it from start to finish. And this has got some awesome stuff in here. So let me go ahead and just kind of thumb through the PDF with you all. And first of all, let me just point out, awesome cover. This unicorn looks horrifying. And that's actually one complaint that I'm going to have later on when we get to the Bestiary section. I think the unicorn was shortchanged, but we'll get to that. This guy looks awesome. And then, of course, you have an elf up here, or what I presume to be an elf. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. All right, so cover art is by Jack Kaiser, as well as some of the interior illustrations. Also, Todd Wilson and Britt Martin contributed to the book. And then for the maps, Cecil Howell, who has done a number of Shadow of the Demon Lord maps, contributed to this book as well. Of course, you have your typical table of contents here. And then we jump right in with faeries. So I have to tell you, in my games, I really don't focus on the fae folk much at all. Faeries just haven't really been a big, how should I put it? I really haven't been too interested in them. Elves really don't do it. I'm not the type of player that plays an elf. When I'm playing a character class in whatever game, whatever flavor of fantasy, if elves are an option, I don't usually play an elf. In fact, I don't think I've ever played an elf. I can't ever think of having rolled up an elf. I don't know why. They just don't appeal to me for some reason. I think they're cool. I mean, I liked them in Lord of the Rings. I think that they are an interesting, interesting ancestry. But I think if I had to pick one thing about them that I guess bothers me is that they are kind of aloof and they have weird ways of interacting with mortals, which we'll get into. Now, not so much in Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings, they were just kind of like a isolationist type of society, but the fairies in this book are modeled after the folklore that comes out of Europe. And, some of that's pretty darn scary. And that's what you're seeing in the fae folk presented in this book. Whereas that would make an interesting, or they do make interesting catalysts for stories and opponents, not so much for me anyway. It really doesn't interest me that much to actually play one. But anyway, so we start off here basically talking about the nature of fairies. And so you get a little bit more of how the fae folk were actually created in other supplements. But basically what happened was when the genies were creating the world, they had to cut it off from the void because too many demons were coming in causing problems. So when they created the barrier to separate the universe or the multiverse from the void, it trapped a lot of the demons that were here, or not here. Although looking around my basement, I would say that some demons have had their way down here, but no, on Earth, the Earth universe, the demons that were trapped there had to take physical form because that's the law basically. If you're not in the void and you're a demon, then you have to take a physical shape in the multiverse. I didn't make the law up. That's just one of the things the genies came up with, evidently. So those demons that were trapped became the first fairies. They took on humanoid forms, but they came in all kinds of shapes and sizes. And being as how they were, demons from the void, they were naturally infused with magic, and so they tend to be a more magically inclined ancestry. So it kind of talks about that a little bit here. Talks about how they live forever. It kind of goes into how their souls are basically inseparable from their physical form. So if their physical form dies, their soul dies. Their souls do not enter the cycle of life like mortal souls do. So they don't get reincarnated, they don't get reborn, they don't get recycled. Basically, once a fairy creature dies, it's dead. So that's problematic. But to offset that, they live forever. So as long as they don't get killed, they could potentially live forever, which is great, except they do get killed. And so in order for them to make up their numbers, they have to propagate. And fairies just don't do a good job of that, whether it is due to their magical nature or whether it's due to some inherent flaw in their reproduction, or maybe it's just a societal thing. Not really sure. It's not clear. But they tend to have very few offspring, which means that you kill a good number of elves and fae folk. It takes a long time for them to recoup those numbers. So that's a problem that they have had throughout their existence. So kind of goes into how fairies also tend to be, and this is part of their magical nature, they tend to be naturally invisible to most mortals, but they can be seen usually through children and animals and other supernatural creatures. But they do tend to be naturally invisible, and that helps them to hide from the mortal creatures that outnumber them in the world, which has become an important survival tactic for them, as we'll get to. But talks about that a little bit here, and also talks about how there's legends and myths on how one can protect themselves from fairy, from the fae folk. That includes things like wearing your clothes inside out, which confuses fairies enough that they'll leave you alone. Keeping an iron nail in your pocket to protect yourself from fairy spells. Pig's head or pentagram on the door causes fairies to pass over your home. A lot of these could be superstitions. Some of those may work. But this is, some of the things that you can incorporate into your game if you're heavy into the fae lore. These would be some of the things that mortals believe will protect them from the fairy folk. Whether they do or not, it's up to you. All right, iron loathing kind of talks about the inherent allergic reaction that they have to iron, and how iron just kind of causes a disruption in their magical nature. And that explains why they cannot bear the touch of iron or the presence of iron. They also think it smells. I think it stinks, which is probably just an instinct that they develop to protect them or to alert them of the presence of iron, so I can stay away from it. Kind of like with me and poison ivy, except I can't smell poison ivy, so it gets me every damn time. But anyway, I digress. So then we talk about fairies and mortals, and how fairies really think that mortals are kind of weird, and they like to fuck with them. So kind of goes into that a little bit. Talks about how you don't really want to piss a fairy off because they will, they'll come at you, and they'll really make your life hell. But it also talks about if you're nice to them, or if you treat them in a way that they feel is appropriate, then they'll do favors for you, like mend your shoes, or they will clean your house, or things like that. So it's an interesting relationship that mortals have with fairies. It's an interesting read. I would give that a read. And again, this is stuff you can incorporate into your game. Now, fairies are a different ancestry. They are aliens, basically. They have an alien mindset. They cannot comprehend what a mortal lifetime is. So for them, it's nothing to befriend a mortal and then want to go visit them again a couple hundred years later, only to find out they've been dead for 200 years. And then they're shocked because they were just talking to them the other day, which to them the other day was 2 centuries ago. So the passage of time is really perceived differently by the fae folk. They also have a different view of morality, and some of the things that they pull on mortals really kind of fucked up. One of the worst things they do is they steal mortal children. And they do this for various reasons. Sometimes it's because the mortals pissed them off. Sometimes it's because they need to steal mortal babies to create fairies. And that's one of the ways that they propagate is by taking a mortal child, incorporating them into their fae society, and after a bit of time, their magic kind of transforms that baby into a fairy. And I guess they think it's fair compensation to leave a changeling in the place of the mortal baby. So they're not totally without some kind of sense of honor, I suppose, or maybe they just think that, if they're taking this, they need to have an equal exchange. Who knows how they justify it, but they leave behind a changeling, which is basically a bundle of mud and grass and twigs and rocks that have been shoved together in the form of a weird mud baby and magicked up to act and look like a normal baby for a temporary amount of time, just long enough so that they can get away with the mortal baby and not have anybody know that the mortal baby has been missing, which is usually a few days, maybe a few weeks. can be a few years, and it can actually be a permanent change. And these creatures, these changelings, actually develop into sentient creatures that are one of the ancestries in the core rulebook. They're kind of accidents. The changelings in the core rulebook are accidents. They were not meant to be permanent. They just infused a little bit too much fairy juice into that mud baby, and that mud baby became a permanent changeling that is now your player character. So, but most of them just kind of revert back to their mud and rock, grass, twig form after a few days, leaving the parents heartbroken. So that's kind of messed up. But it's a thing that the fairies do. All right, so the fairies also have a very political structure, and they are led by lords and ladies, also known as kings and queens. There are a bunch of them. I'm not going to go through all of them. The ones that are kind of most important are listed in this book, and in this particular section, it talks about Titania, who is the fairy queen who rules over Alfheim. And she's also the Summer Queen, the goddess known as the Summer Queen. But people don't know that. They know them as two distinct individuals. They know that there's a Summer Queen that's a god, and then there's this queen over here in Alfheim, the mythic city of Alfheim, which may or may not exist, that has a fairy queen by the name of Titania. So they're supposed to be two separate entities, but they're actually the same person. And there's also the Goblin King, Diabolus, of course, the devil, the Lord of Hell, the adversary, Satan, whatever you want to call him. He's a fairy lord. Then you have the Queen of Dreams and Shadows, who was a powerful fey queen in Balgrendia before she nuked it, which we'll get to. And then there's some others, but those are the ones that are just kind of called out here. And then it talks about how there are fairies that just kind of roam free in the world. Now, I kind of skipped a bit earlier, but the fae used to kind of live on the surface of Earth, pretty much everywhere mortals live today. But several wars that really caused them population problems forced them to go into a self-imposed exile. And these wars started off with the Troll Wars, and then it went on with the Men of Gog, and then they started having trouble with dwarves, and all of these conflicts whittled down their numbers to the point where they were struggling to recoup them. And so the Fey Lords and Ladies basically made a conscious choice to withdraw from the mortal world and to bring the Fey into hidden realms. But some fairies stayed behind, and those fays are kind of making their own way in the real world, but they're mostly hiding in places where mortals kind of steer clear from for the most part. Some of those fae include Bloody Bones, which are in the core rulebook, the Nis, also in the core rulebook, or Nissi, or Nicey, or I don't know how to pronounce that. Dryads and Hags, all those are in the core rulebook, and there are a bunch more, or there's some more in this book. But the most successful fae race that live in the mortal world are the goblins. Now, the goblins didn't choose to live in the mortal world; they were exiled by the Queen of Summer, or Titania. And the reason for that is because of their king. The Goblin King, he was kind of infatuated with the Fairy Queen, and so he wanted to kiss her, but she was kind of standoffish, being in mourning after having lost her lover. She wasn't really interested in starting a fling up with the Goblin King, but he really wanted that kiss. So he kind of snuck in and snuck a kiss away from her. And in doing so, it kind of stole some of her power accidentally, maybe. And that pissed her off. So what she did was she took all of the Goblin King's followers and exiled them into the mortal realm. You're gone. You have been evicted from the Big Brother house. You're out of here. And so the goblins went into the mortal world and started living there. Kind of also lost their immortality. So goblins really got kind of fucked on that deal, but they don't care because they're doing just fine. Goblins can procreate like crazy, and they are living the life where fairies are kind of struggling in their hidden realms. So that's how some fae are actually living in the mortal realms to this day, but most of them are in these hidden realms, which we'll talk about here in a bit. All right, so as far as the fae and their relationship with gods, they really don't worship any gods. They don't see the point. They don't believe that gods exist. They know there are powerful entities out there, but they aren't gods. So they really don't worship gods, but there can be exceptions. Maybe a particular elf or hobgoblin, got a visitation from Astrid, and that was enough to convince them that, hey, maybe there is something to this divine stuff. So it talks about how there can be fairy priests. If you want to roll up a fairy priest, that is allowed, and it talks about how you can justify that. And then the next section talks about fairy characters. Now I'm kind of gloss over this section, but it starts off with your usual stuff. You have your professions, your starting equipment, all of which is geared towards the fae. You got fairy backgrounds, interesting things that are very fairy-like, and then you have your new ancestries, which include your elves and your hobgoblins and your pixies. Now, here's the thing with the elves. The interesting thing about the elves is that based on this, you can create an elf that doesn't look anything like an elf from Lord of the Rings, or any elf that is in popular fiction like D&D or World of Warcraft. Elves in this world take on unique forms. You do, of course, have elves that look like your Lord of the Rings elves and your World of Warcraft elves, but you also have elves that have tails, or you have elves that are two-dimensional. And when they turn sideways, they disappear from your sight. You have elves that are part animal and part non-animal, part humanoid. Some elves don't have pointed ears. You just have a wide variety of elven forms that you can tailor your character to. So if you want to run an elf, but you don't want them to look like an elf, you can totally do that in this game. It is, in fact, a normal elf thing. So we go into elves. We talk about, their attitudes, what their thoughts are on good and evil. All this stuff is listed here. I'm not going to go through all that. Creating an elf, I'm not going to go through that. The worst part about elves got some cool stuff. They have spell defense, which is pretty powerful. They have shadow sight, which is pretty good stuff. But they do have iron vulnerability, which really sucks. It means you can't have a sword. It means you can't have an axe, unless those are made out of exotic materials like bone or obsidian, something like that. And then they have a bewitching presence, which is how others see and behave around them, and helps in social situations. Then you got your typical elf background stuff, elf fairy marks, which basically is a mark that really identifies them as a fairy. So, an elf can look like a human if you want them to, but they do have a distinguishing fairy feature, whether it's plainly visible or whether it's, more hard to find is up to you and up to, this table here. But, they do have something that gives them away. And then they have quirks, which also, again, kind of helps define the fact that they are not human and makes them very elven. And then we go into their elf personalities. So those are your elves. Every fantasy game's got to have an elf, so you have your elves here. But what I like about these elves is that they are different enough that you can make them not your typical D&D elf. Looks like my familiar Salem has decided to help me out with this video. Thanks for walking by and cursing me there, Salem. All right, next up is hobgoblins. Hobgoblins are probably my favorite Fae creature that is an ancestry. Not because I want to play one, I just think they're hilarious. They all look the same. Every hobgoblin looks like this. They have the same features. They all weigh the same. They all look the same. They are very reminiscent to me of Oompa Loompas, except, they're not red-skinned, and they're not diminutive. They are normal size. In fact, they're actually pretty big. And they're actually pretty strong. I mean, they start off with a strength of 11. So the reason for that is because they're warriors. They were actually bred for battle. So they are the rank and file warriors of the elves and of the Fae kind. But they look all the same. They're hilarious. You could have a whole party of hobgoblins. They all look the same. The only thing that's different about them are the clothes that they wear, which I think would be hilarious to do someday, but I don't see my group actually doing something like that. Maybe one of your groups will do it, and maybe you'll let me know about it, and the hilarity then ensues. But they got this big pot belly that just kind of aprons over their genital junk. And all they really want to do is fight. But there's not enough fighting to be had, so they tend to take on occupations that kind of revolve around fighting, like making armor, making weapons, or things like that. But yeah, you have your hobgoblins here, and their abilities aren't all that standoutish. They do have shadow sight, which is good. They also have iron vulnerability, and for combat, they have frenzy, which means in combat, roll a 6 at the end of each round. If you are neither incapacitated nor subject to this trait, on a 6, you become frenzied for 1 minute. While frenzied, you're immune to the frightened affliction. Your attacks deal 1d6 extra damage, and all creatures you attack that attack you make their attack rolls with 1 boon. So that can be kind of cool. Watching your hobgoblin go into a frenzy. You got your backgrounds here, your age, frenzy side effects listed, and personalities. All right, then you have your pixie. These are your, your tiny flying fae, and your Tinkerbells, and probably the most problematic for me. The reason that they're most problematic is because they are A, tiny. B, they are naturally invisible. And 3, they fly. So those are 3 things, especially at low levels, that can really cause a DM heartache if the DM doesn't really have a grasp on how to run the game and how to deal with this type of character. Now, to kind of offset that, they are small. So they do very little damage, and as they level up, they don't get as much health. So they're easy to kill, and they don't do a whole lot of damage, but they can be a pain in the ass. So Pixie just kind of doesn't, I almost want to, just not allow it in my game. I haven't not allowed it, but nobody's actually picked it yet either. But if they did, it would be problematic because of those 3 things. I would get around it, but it would take work, and I don't like to work when I'm a GM. I like to have fun when I'm a GM. Okay, so it's got the usual tables here, and then we go into our expert paths. I'm definitely going to skim over this. I really don't want to go into the expert paths. You can read through that when you buy this supplement. There's some interesting things here, like the cat Sith or the cat she. Harbinger's cool. Keeper of the Flame's pretty interesting. And I like the Night Stalker. It's very interesting as well. Spellweaver for a caster. And then your Troll Hunter. So those are your expert paths. And we get then into... Are those all expert, or did we have... Yeah, I think they're all expert. Or did we have... No, we have master paths in there. Okay, so we have expert paths, which are the avowed and the... That's it, the avowed. And then the rest are master paths, so my bad. So all the ones I just named off are master paths. Okay, so moving on. We get to magic. And these are... this is a new ancestry. Well, it was new at the time. It's not new now, but at the time this introduced the Fae ancestry. And actually, not really sure if the Fae ancestry was in the core rulebook or not. It might have been. I don't recall off the top of my head. But this did introduce more spells if it was. And these are all very Fae-centric and flavored that way. So there are a couple of interesting spells in here. Not really seeing a whole lot of these in action because, again, my players haven't really picked anything out of this book to play in my campaigns as of yet. But, some of these look fairly interesting. I like the Seeking Missile and Phasing Missile. You got a sleep spell in here somewhere. The Slumber. You have some curse spells, some enchantment spells, all the stuff that you would typically expect to see with elves and the Fae folk. Hidden Space, Imprison, and some songs. Elves like singing, and actually has a sidebar here. It talks about how they like singing. In fact, what does it say here? Fairies love music and often weave magic into their songs and melodies that can bewitch mortals who hear the tunes, luring them to join the Fae in their dancing and capering. Fairies favor fiddles, harps, cymbals, tambourines, and mouth harps, all good at making that sort of lively music that mortals find enchanting. Many popular fairy songs are the foundations for spells of the song tradition. So there you go. All right, so now we get into the lands of the fairies. So this kind of talks about different places in the world that are kind of either touched by or influenced or actually directly occupied by fairies. And it talks about how some of these are hidden realms. That's what this first section here is about. It talks about what hidden realms are. Basically, hidden realms are bubbles of reality that were kind of like the after effect of the creation of this universe, which also created these kind of like dimensional bubbles of varying sizes. And so the Fae, when they withdrew from the mortal world, took advantage of these bubbles and used them to create their own world. Now they're limited in size and scope, but they are they can be big enough to seem like their own world. So that's where a lot of hidden realms are. But there are still some places in the real world that are very enchanted by fairies. So some of those places are like the fairy rings. Now, fairy rings are typically denoted by a ring of some sort of flora, fauna, or like mushrooms. If you see a ring of mushrooms, it's typically a fairy ring. And people who come across these may hear music emanating from them. If they do, then they have to succeed on a will challenge roll, I believe. And if they succeed, then the music just kind of dies away and then nothing comes of it. But if they fail, then they are lured in by the music of the Fae circle or the fairy ring, and the character is then forced to dance and revel within that ring. But the thing is, they turn invisible. So to everybody else, they go into this ring and they disappear. But to them, they're still in this ring and they're dancing, and they're compelled to continue dancing, and they have to keep dancing, and they have to make string challenge rolls. If they fail, they become fatigued, and it's they can dance to death basically. So that coming upon a fair ring can really ruin a adventure party's day. Then you have the hollow hills. Hollow hills are like fairy mounds or hills that have been kind of hollowed out. They can be home to certain fairies that are still living in the realm. They could be doorways to the hidden realms, or they could be tombs of important fairies that died long before the fairies left the real world, and they buried their fae folk in these mounds. So these can also be very magical places. Islands of the Fae, there are islands in the world or isolated places where the Fae that didn't withdraw from the world kind of made their homes because of their isolation. And these places tend to be like really beautiful, idyllic places. So, like the Bahamas are islands of the Fae, or the Cayman Islands. Basically paradise on Earth, but that is just if you don't piss off the fae that live there. Then it talks about secret roads. Now, secret roads are kind of like these shortcuts in the real world that are due to these pathways, again, formed when the world was formed by this imperfect material that kind of branches a couple of places together. So they're like hyperspace lanes in Star Wars, or they're like wormholes, whatever you want to think of them as. Secret roads basically offer a shortcut from here to there. But they're typically invisible. They may have something that gives them away, like maybe a particular knot in a tree, maybe the entrance to a secret road. A stone monolith might be a marker to a secret road. These are all possibilities. I mean, you can do whatever you want with them, but basically it's a way to allow travel from one spot to another. Now, typically, it says actually in the book here, it says it's one way. Whether it's one way or not, it's up to you. But that's how it's described in the book. Is one-way travel from point A to point B. All right, then you have stones, boulders, and monuments. So this just kind of describes how the Fae left behind all these marked things that give them away as having belonged to the Fae at some point. Maybe they had some purpose back in the day. Maybe they still have some purpose. Maybe they still hold magic. Maybe they still hold power. It's up to you. But there's usually some kind of marking on them or something that gives them away that makes them unique to the fairy kind. So runes, some sort of property where, when you get close to them, animals start talking, or maybe there's a perpetual mist that hangs around them. Something that actually gives them away as being, kind of important to the Fae. One thing in particular here is called the Endless Stair, which is a stone staircase that is located, I think it said, in the Misty Wood. Yeah, in the Mistwood. And basically, it's just in the middle of the forest, you see this stone stairway going up about 30 feet. And then it stops. So it looks like somebody started building a stairway and then just for some reason stopped 30 feet up and didn't ever build a structure around it. It's believed that this is a stairway that leads to the home of the Maiden on the Moon. But, that's, again, up to you to decide whether that's true or not. But basically, it is an enchanted stairway, so you can climb up it, and as you climb, you continue to climb. More stairs materialize as you climb up it, and it will keep going pretty much forever. But when you turn around and walk back down, you only walk 30 steps before you hit the forest floor again. Or 31 steps. So, enchanted. So there's magic for you. Then it talks about trees and forests, how those are, also enchanted, having walking trees. And And how there are things that are like the spires that are all over the place in the Northern Reach, like in the town of Crossings, Fae spires. Talks a little bit about that sort of stuff. Stray sod. So when you got a powerful fae that walks the mortal world, sometimes they leave the stray sod in places where they have walked, and the sod kind of is a kind of like a living material that will try to catch on to somebody that steps on it and ends up cursing them. So it, bad stuff. Interesting to put into your game, perhaps. Definitely not something one of my characters would, or my players would expect. Let's see, moving on. Borderlands. Okay, so Borderlands talks about how there is a transitional zone between the mortal world and the hidden realms, or the hidden kingdoms. And these are the borderlands. Now, the borderlands can be a very small, confined thing, like a rock, or like I said, a knob on a tree branch, a fairy circle, fairy ring. All these things can be borderlands, or it can be an expansive effect, like the Mistwood is essentially the borderlands to Alfheim. And that's why there's a perpetual mist in the Mistwood, because it is the borderland to a rather large realm, which is Alfheim. So the smaller the realm, the smaller the borderland, the larger the realm, the larger the borderland. So it kind of talks about that here. Talks about how to cross over. Part of the problem with the borderlands is you're starting to get into areas where the barriers between the real world and the void are kind of weak, and so there can be demons that kind of make their way into the borderlands. So not only can you face fairies in there, you can also face demons in there, which can be problematic. And it also talks about Spriggans. They're also found in the borderlands. All right, now we get into the hidden kingdoms. Now, hidden kingdoms, I've already kind of talked about what they are. It talks about how to cross over into them. You usually need something. They are closed off from the real world. So if you find one, great. You still can't get in unless you have a talisman or a token or a magic word or something that was set up by the Fae Lord or Lady that created it that allows you entry. So that's described here. Talks about hidden kingdom features. Basically, the hidden kingdom takes on the shape and features that the powerful Fae Lord or Lady desired. And so those features can change. If they have the whim to have waterfalls appear one day in the middle of the city, then by golly, there's going to be waterfalls appearing in the middle of the city because the Fae Lord or Lady desires it to be so. They essentially are the gods of their realms, and they can manifest whatever they want inside their hidden kingdoms, which is pretty cool. Talks about how inside hidden kingdoms, animals tend to be smarter than your average animal on Earth, and so they also tend to develop the ability to talk. So this kind of goes into more of what we are used to seeing with fairy creatures in popular culture. So when you're thinking of movies like Narnia or the books of Narnia, and you have talking animals and talking creatures like that, that's where this is starting to go into that territory. So you got talking animals. It has all sorts of different things you would find in a hidden kingdom, different features, different weird events. Starts going into specific hidden kingdoms like Alfheim. Talks about the Hell Tithe, which basically all the fairy lords and ladies basically promised Diabolus a tithing of souls on a regular basis. And so that's an important thing, which is another reason why fairies steal babies. And they like to fuck with mortals so that they can cough up their hell tithe. Let's see here. We got the Nameless City, Elysium, which is basically the opposite of hell. It's kind of like a, it's billed by mortals as heaven. It's a place that mortals want to get to. It is a place where the good are promised their eternal reward for being good. But it's really a prison. It's a prison for mortal souls that prevents them from recycling. And the trade-off is they get to keep their memories and their they retain everything that they had in life, with the exception of their mortal bodies. But that's also a curse, because now they live in heaven. Everything is easy for them there because they're spirits. It's an idyllic place. There's no strife. There's nothing to overcome, and so it becomes a prison for these mortals that probably spent their lives fighting for a cause, to be good, to be just, and now they just kind of exist. So, but there's no way out. Once they're in Elysium, they can't get out. And there's actually constructs that were built at the gateway to Elysium that prevents things from escaping. And I kind of liken this to the Never-Ending Story, where you had those two stone creatures, and Atreyu kind of came up, and these things opened their eyes and shot their lasers down at whatever was trying to cross. Anyway, that's what I picture. You probably picture something much cooler than that. But that's all I got, folks. But at any rate, child of the 80s, what can I say? So, that's Elysium for you. Then it talks about the Isle of Forever. That's where the I forget what this one is. The Horn King lives there. Okay, so Horn King, he's like the Lord of the Hunt, I believe. This is his realm. Then you have the Maze of the Goblin King. Okay, so now we're getting into just outright taking a concept from a movie and plugging it in right here into this game. This is, if you've ever seen the movie Labyrinth, this is the movie Labyrinth. The Goblin King is David Bowie, and everything that was in the movie Labyrinth is detailed right here. You got the maze, you've got the bog of eternal stench. There is a chessboard here, which is kind of cool. That wasn't in the movie that I recall. But yeah, I mean, Hall of Dancing. This is Labyrinth. So if you like that movie, which I did, I loved Labyrinth. It's still one of my favorite movies that I enjoyed with my daughter when she was growing up. And truth be told, I liked it before she was born. But anyway, it's a great movie. What's not to like? It's got David Bowie, right? So there you go. Labyrinth is right here. All right. Then you have the Midnight Lands, which was formerly the Nilfheim, the hidden kingdom of the what was her name? The Queen of Dreams and Shadows. But she nuked it. The reason she nuked it was because the Witch King decided he was going to march in there and show her who was boss. And he did. He broke through all of her protections, went into Nilfheim, and started really fucking up the fairies that lived there. So the Queen of Dreams and Shadows basically turned her hidden kingdom inside out, which was essentially a nuke, and killed most of her own people, killed most of the invading force, and really ruined the Witch King's day. He never really recovered from that fully, and so that was what happened to cause the Midnight Lands to become the Midnight Lands. So basically, Midnight Lands are the remainder of the forest that the remainder of the Queen of Dreams and Shadows had to exile her people into after she nuked Nilfheim. It sucks, but hey, you got to do what you got to do to survive, right? All right. Now that finishes up the Hidden Kingdom section. Now we go into rewards, and it talks about different different things that you can reward your players when you're using the supplement and dealing with powerful fae. One of the first things are favors of the Great Fae. So if you're dealing with a Great Fae, like a Fae Lord or Lady, and you take on a quest for them, or you do something that's beneficial to them, or do them a favor or whatever, then they can bestow upon your characters a favor. And there's a whole table of interesting favors here that you can give them. So instead of giving them an enchanted dagger or whatever, they can have good luck, or they can have courage, or they can have perfect health. These are all interesting things that they could be bestowed, a favor that can be bestowed upon them. Then you have enchanted objects. So for those players that like enchanted daggers, you can enchant them up using this table here. This supplements the enchanted items in the core rulebook, but it, again, more Fae-centric. And then it talks about a Fae steed. So they could be granted a fairy horse or a steed that has the statistics of a horse, but actually maybe something else that has flaming eyes, or some other quality. It talks. But anyway, that's listed out here as something you could definitely give out as a gift. Then you got your Fae-specific relics. Some interesting stuff here. Circe's ring, not cool, kind of powerful, but it's also cursed, and yeah, that can happen. So you also have Glass of Seeing, which is basically the seeing glasses, or the seeing orbs from Lord of the Rings. Heartkill is an enchanted longbow, kind of cool. Midnight Cloak, very cool. Wooden Boy, basically, is Pinocchio. And then you have the Vorpal Sword. Now, Vorpal Swords exist in D&D, and they're pretty powerful. Coveted by most most martial characters that want powerful swords. A Vorpal Sword would be one of those things that they would covet. You don't want to covet this Vorpal Sword. This Vorpal Sword is too powerful. Yeah, it cuts off the heads of your enemies, but if you fuck up, it cuts your head off. So let that sink in for a minute. All right. Then we go into the Bestiary section. Some of these are, kind of meh, like the Azrai, meh. They're like water fairies. Then you have the Banshee, badass. Banshees are tough. Difficulty 500. They will ruin your day. They have epic recovery and epic adversary. Banshees are definitely a boss. You don't want to mess with them. Then you got don't even know how to pronounce that, the Bean Niggy, whatever. That's what this thing is. Looks like a woman wearing, tattered rags, or, kind of like a greenish robe, or can't think, leather thing. Anyway, usually stooped over, looking like they're doing laundry in a creek or a river or a lake. But they are very evil, and they are there to ruin your life. And so they will pounce on you and attack until you're dead, unless you interpose yourself between them and the body of water that they were doing their laundry in. And if you do that, then they are forced to answer 3 questions from you. But the key is you have to answer 3 questions from them. They will answer you truthfully, but you have to answer them truthfully. If you lie to them, then you take damage. So that's an interesting thing. It's actually in the creature description. It is not in the stat block. So that would be something worth reading just the description for. And that would be a great role-playing scene. So let's say that this Bean Niggy has information that is vital to the player character's quest. She knows where to find the Vorpal Sword. She's going to attack you, but you can stop the attack by interposing yourself between her and the river. And then she has to answer 3 questions truthfully. But then you have to answer 3 questions truthfully. So I think that's really cool. I love that. It's very interesting. So then you have Kushi, which are big Fey dogs. Eh. Then you have three types of elves that are statted up here: Highborn Elf, a Knight Errant Elf, and a Reveler. So if you need elves, there you go. Then you got the Fashion or the Fashion. These are really creepy, and they're also called half-men. And so basically, it's a creature with a head, a torso that has one arm, and one leg. So it hops around, and it attacks you with the one arm, and it's got a mouthful of sharp teeth. So it's a horrifying fairy, creepy as fuck, and so this is one of the things I didn't realize was in this. I mean, I saw the picture. I just thought it was at a weird angle. I didn't realize it just had one arm and one leg until I actually read the monster. And now I realize this is a really, really disturbing monster. I need to use this in a game. So I actually need to create a token for it first, and then I need to use it in a game. So that's what I'll be doing here shortly. Let's see, we got Fawn, Imps, and then we come to the Jabberwock. All right, the Jabberwock, again, another boss monster. Difficulty 500, size 4. Dude's tough. Epic adversary, epic recovery. The only thing that I have a problem with is his damage output isn't that great. He does 46 damage with his jaws, and then with his claws, he only does 2d6 damage. Of course, he has the catch feature as well, but 2d6 for a size 4, nah. I think I bumped that up to 46 as well. I might bump up the jaws to 66. After all, this is an iconic monster. Jabberwock. Who doesn't know about the Jabberwock, right? So I would definitely bump this guy up. All right, kobolds. Kobolds are not your D&D kobolds. These are not little mini dragon lizard men. These are short, stocky fairies with big noses, and basically they lived underground. So they were kind of forgotten when the elves left the world. They were kind of left behind, and so now they're kind of pissed off at the elves. One interesting thing about them is that even though they're fairies, since they labored for most of their existence under the earth, or lived under the earth, they have grown an immunity to iron. So they're not bothered by iron. So they lack that weakness. All right, lairs, that's what you call spirits that are trapped in Elysium. Marrow, those are merfolk, basically. Nymphs. Nymphs are tough. I just kind of looked over this one day and I thought, nymph, you got a pretty elf chick that's throwing herself at a bunch of characters that are walking through the forest. That's a throwaway encounter. No, it's not a throwaway encounter. They're difficulty 250. They are a force to be reckoned with. They've got lots of, look at their stat block. It takes up a whole page or half a page. So, yeah, power 6, mostly enchantment, of course, but they also have Fey magic in there. Yeah, these guys are tough. So don't sneeze at the nymph. If you guys get run across a nymph, you best turn away and go the opposite direction. Then you got your pixies, satyrs, All right, then you come to the unicorn, which, again, the unicorn is basically a horse. It does have a little minor teleporting ability, but what I would say is lacking here is that unicorns are kind of iconic as well. Just like the Jabberwocky is, unicorns are iconic. I would have given them something extra, made their horn magical, have them do something special besides just teleporting. They just don't really jump out at me. So I would do something to make unicorns more special, and then have a unicorn king or queen that's even more special on top of that. Like maybe a black unicorn, or maybe you have a silver unicorn, or maybe you have a rainbow unicorn, or whatever. And that's the other thing. Have them shit rainbows, or piss rainbows and shit cupcakes. Something special that makes unicorn. That's my only complaint. I'll leave that alone there. Just dropped it there. There you go. All right. Last thing that's left in the supplement is the obligatory adventure. And this is an adventure for expert characters. And I read it a while back. I don't remember it all, but what I remembered when I was reading through it is, why would my characters want to go through this? The window for success is tiny, and the opportunity to make a lifetime enemy is great. So just kind of reading through this, I was like, I don't think I'll ever be running this, but maybe I'll give it another read, and maybe I missed something that makes it more worthwhile, or maybe I can kind of fiddle with it a little bit. But basically, it's all summed up here in the conclusion. Unless they do a very specific thing, they're going to piss off either the person that they're trying to help or the person that they are helping against, or both. And that's going to cause them problems. So there you go. All right, so that is it for Terrible Beauty. This is a great supplement. Lots of interesting stuff in here. And if you ever wanted to do a campaign that is based on elves and fairies and fae and all that stuff, this is your book. You need to go out and buy it. It's really good. I'm not that guy, so I really probably didn't sell it as good as Mr. Schwab would have liked. But I don't work for Mr. Schwab, so sorry, dude. But I am going to say that this is a great book for what it is. And I will tell you that just from my own personal reading experience, the Dresden Files series has a lot to do with the Fae culture. If you're wanting some ideas on how to incorporate Fae into your game, read the Dresden Files. Well, read the Dresden Files anyway, because it's a damn good series. But it's definitely good for getting ideas for how to utilize Fae, powerful Fae in particular, in your campaigns to really supplement this. There's another series of books, and I forget, the author's name is Karen Moaning, and I forget, I think there's like 6 or 7 books in the series, but it's all very Fae-centric. So look up the author Karen Moaning and all her books. Okay, so that's basically it. Everything else I've read that have elves in it are D&D stuff, which again is nothing like this. All right, so that's it. That's it for my video today. Appreciate you hanging with me. And once again, just a reminder, if you like my video, please like me in YouTube. Helps with the algorithm. Also, leave me a comment if you want to talk about anything I mentioned, even if it's just to say that I'm full of shit and that this book sucks, or if there's particular parts about the book that I missed that you like, call it out. I want people not only be able to watch the videos, but to interact in the comments. So feel free to drop your ideas and your thoughts about what I've talked about and about what's in this book in there, so that you can establish a dialogue with your peers out there. And that's it. So with that, I'm going to let you go. Appreciate your time. Appreciate your watching my videos, and I will catch you on the flip side, if I can ever figure out how to turn this damn video off. Out.